Welcome to Future Sense Now, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. An e-zine of the Futures Forum live online. We exchange ideas, information, and inspiration about the futures we want. Get Future Sense Now with host Dr. Claire Nelson, futurist and editor of Human Futures.
Greetings and welcome to Future Sense Now, an online e-magazine of the Futures Forum. February is Black History Month, and we're having a conversation on the future history of Black America. Specifically, I'd like to examine how Blacks in America might be faring in the year 2030 and beyond. Now, 2030 is considered a pull year, with members of the United Nations around the world setting 17 global goals for achieving greater sustainability, with the Sustainable Development Goal number 10 focusing on inequality. That's a big one for Blacks in America, part of our historic legacy. So, given that in 2030, America will become a majority-minority country, according to the census, the question is, how will things be faring in terms of the inequality-inequity debate? With me today is Howard Anglin. He's a creative thinker who helps his clients unify their business goals with the right strategy and technology, the great driver. He has a passion for learning and problem solving. He has over 2 decades in tech working with organizations worldwide. He has worked with clients in over 17 countries on 5 continents. That's right, all 5. Are there 6 or 5? There are 5 continents, except for Antarctica. So that's 5. As a trusted advisor to transform organizations with the right technology choices. He is a prolific inventor with 20 issued patents and several others pending. Wow, 5 of which are in the blockchain space. He was recently named by the Austin Black Business Journal as an up-and-coming figure in tech. So we're going to be talking more to Howard about his work in blockchain and smart cities and blockchain for fintech and health tech and whatever we can squeeze out of him in the next half an hour. So Howard, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to this chat.
Well, I'll tell you the secret. I like to talk to people who are doing things in the space I know nothing about. It's a way of educating myself. So let's get right into it. So 2030, imagine it or picture it. It's 8 billion people. AI will be ubiquitous, right? We're talking about Industry 4.0 fully ripe and onto Industry 4.1 or 4.2 if you're not sure. We're going to be talking about 400 billion mobile phones, but not just mobile phones, mobile smartphones with 5G capability. So with all of this foment and ferment happening, tell me from your perspective, when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals and they talk about access to health, access to energy, access to water, inequality of all types, how do you think the technology spaces that you're working in can help drive this, I guess, optimistic agenda?
Well, I see technology as the key, to be candid. If you look at the fourth industrial revolution, it's all about technology. It's about a digital technology. So, it requires for us today to engage in the technology, to basically educate ourselves on what this is, what are some of the requirements of the fourth industrial revolution. And to touch on that a little bit, just in simplistic terms, the third industrial revolution had to do with building out the physical infrastructure. The fourth industrial revolution, will have to do with building out the digital infrastructure. And if you look back at the physical infrastructure like roads, electricity, power lines, the water systems, the implications were profound. It essentially changed how we lived, how we worked. If you look at factories, if you look at the 9 to 5, those were all products of the third industrial revolution. Now, the fourth industrial revolution, I pretty much, I don't have the full picture of, exactly what it will look like, but I can identify some of the enabling technologies in some of the areas that one needs to be cognizant of in order to participate in that new economy, in that new revolution.
Well, actually, when you think about this convergence, because I think what makes it really different from the Industry 3.0 is this idea of, okay, now we have, we have computers that can process data, but now we have a convergence of things at the same time. So we have the processing speed, we have the material sciences, we have the genomics, we have 3D printing, we have a convergence of things, which, as you say, come out of a digital understanding of the world, a quantum understanding of the world, as opposed to a Newtonian physics understanding of the world. And so it has kind of changed everything and the way we see things. As a matter of fact, I laughingly say sometimes our grandmothers and grandfathers and ancestors knew what they were talking about when they were talking about the spirit world, because science is approximating the spirit world more and more. We see brains operating exoskeletons. So as we talk about this, let's jump into the healthcare. So we see brains operating exoskeletons for people who are disabled, right? It's a form of AI, etc. How do you think that this technology could, if not properly managed, create a greater distance between, let's say, the haves and the have-nots?
So technology in its, by itself, there's nothing, I should say, bad or good about technology. It's essentially how we use technology. That determines the outcome. So, in the past and currently, technology has done quite a bit in the field of healthcare. If you look at, the lifespan of people on the planet, we're living longer. We're having healthier lives, and we're having, in most places at least, more to eat, more options, and we can address health issues earlier. However, when it comes to the outlook for health and technology, future development, we involve data here. So data is a really important topic here. Data essentially represents us. It's in this new industrial revolution, the fourth, data, is the key ingredient to make this all work. And with that data, one can, or institutions can use that data for good, and they could use it for, reasons that are, for in ways that are not necessarily good for patients or or populations, countries, so on and so forth. So one has to be aware of the dangers of data. So data isn't this free resources. So recently, so I just got back from Rwanda at a tech summit that was conducted there, and in one of the panel discussions, they actually brought up a point, and I was surprised by how well it resonated. It was an off-the-cuff statement that I made, and essentially, it's something like this: that data is the new blood. You've heard the term oil. Oil is the new. What is the term? I just forgot it right now. But you will hear the term where they say oil is the data is the new oil. Sorry, data is the new oil. But the way I see it, is that data is the new blood. And when I say blood, that has to do with some like large corporations. Data is their lifeblood. So they survive off data, our data, right? So at some point, we have to have sovereignty over our data, whether it's health data, whether it's financial data, or other, derivative data that's all based on us, our experience, what represents us. So again, going back to healthcare, we need to have individuals, there needs to be some system in place where individuals can have sovereignty or control over their data, who sees it, who can benefit from it, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So yes.
But as you think about that, because I see that you say you're in a blockchain space, and supposedly blockchain is, certainly is driving new things called cryptocurrency. I don't understand what that is, so therefore I've not invested in it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I understand what it is technically, I understand the technical thing, but I don't understand it intuitively, which is a different level of understanding. And that
Correct.
probably is the problem, because we're saying these things, and as you know, America does not really have a strong technology assessment culture. I mean, we used to have an Office of Technology Assessment many years ago, and more recently, at least Congress used to have one, but more recently, the GAO, Government Accounting Office, has created an Office of Technology Assessment. But that's looking at next gen stuff, not stuff
Mm-hmm.
that's currently here. And it's certainly not looking at the impact of these technologies as far as equity issues and equity conversations. So how are we as Black politicians or Black advocates, Black policymakers, beefing up and getting access to people who understand the implications of AI and data
Mm-hmm.
analytics and data mining and all these things? How are we doing that? Are we doing that, first of all?
I'm not so sure. I think a lot more can be done. I truly believe so. And in terms of getting access to experts, the experts are out there.
Mhm.
It's a matter of reaching out to the right avenues for people to educate those who are making policies. And of course, that can be a challenge in some instances. Why should I ask this other person over here where I'm the expert in my field? So why should I go and ask this other person on whether it's
No, but the
cryptocurrency?
politicians are not experts in technology. So,
They're
for
not.
example, if I were to ask you, give me a specific example in how
Hmm.
blockchain, the use of blockchain, if applied in a particular way, could disadvantage me as a consumer around either my healthcare or around either my, access to finance. Is there a specific example you could give me to say, look, if we don't pay attention, it could be used this way?
Right, right. So, so it's a blockchain itself is a nascent technology. It's a relatively new technology, but the implications are great. So it's important for policymakers and politicians to understand, at least have a basic understanding of the technology. So it's necessary for politicians to reach out to technology experts to help educate themselves. And to
Yeah,
your
but they're not
point,
doing that. So my question is, if
right.
I'm asking you specifically, what is an example? If you Because you have to give them in short sound bites. Give me a sound
Mhm.
bite and say, if we don't pay attention, this could happen. What is one of those sound bites?
Right. So I haven't, I have to think about that a little, but
Yeah.
when you think
Okay.
about data,
Yeah.
again, blockchain is essentially a ledger. It's essentially a list, and it has to do with data again. Whether it's cryptocurrencies or the other uses of blockchain technology, essentially it's managing data. Again, it goes back to data, and it's just keeping track of balances when it comes to cryptocurrency. And then in other applications, blockchain has to do with having a list of let me step back a little bit here. So
Give me an
I,
example of how could use it in healthcare. How would I use blockchain in personalized medicine, for example, or in my healthcare?
so again, using the analogy of a list, blockchain is essentially a list. So it could be a list of symptoms. It could be a list attributed to an individual of symptoms or the medication that they're on, or other related derivative uh, outcomes.
Mhm.
However, if this is stored on the blockchain, and blockchain data is stored forever, right? It's always there. One has to consider things as again, um, should we be anonymizing the data? Should we ensure that data is protected because it's there, it's on the ledger, it's in that list, and it's there forever? So, controls will need to be in place in order to protect that data, to protect the patient information, for instance, because there are tons of implications there. Whether it's future insurance coverage or some other outcome that we can't really think of today, but it will have implication in the future. So,
but I thought the reason for moving to blockchain is because prefer exactly that it's there for everybody to see, quote
yes,
unquote, and therefore people can't, like, for example, use it as a ledger for accounting or for contracts, because then people can't steal it. So what
right.
you're saying, other people can see it as well. That's what you're saying?
Correct. So, so having data and making that data accessible to, let's say, those in a consortia, so if you're not part of the consortia, and again, this is for, without getting into too much detail, there are two classes of blockchain. So there's a private blockchain, and then there's a public blockchain. So the public blockchain, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies would fall under that umbrella. The private blockchains are the ones that banks, insurance companies, and hospitals would most likely use. So one has to be invited into that network to participate in order to share and access data. However, data still has to be protected. If a certain type of data is on the blockchain, then members within the consortia will have access, assuming they have the correct accessibility rights. However, when that data is pulled, then they can, operate on that data. There are derivative things that can be done on that data. So we have to think about the life cycle of the data, so to speak. So, it's stored, and it has to be encrypted for one, right?
I'm laughing because as you said, life cycle of the data, I'm thinking, so our data lives on long after we have gone on to another world. And it reminds me of the Henrietta Lack story with her cells, the cancer cells that were used as the stem for all these other experiments on cancer. So because health is something that most people can understand, I'm kind of sticking to health, although fintech is also important. But I'm trying to figure out, if you just got back from Africa, East Africa, certainly Kenya, one of those countries, kind of jumped over a lot of things and went straight into smartphones and smart money and mobile pay. In fact, there were drivers in the mobile payment system. So how, from a blockchain perspective, having come back from Africa, are there things that you're seeing in Africa that we should be like looking at in the Black community here and saying, hey, maybe we should be going this route in order to either have greater access to healthcare or greater create a new economic system around which we can do, quote unquote, banking, and therefore create our own insurance scheme for those who are uninsured? I mean, what are you seeing that could be helpful for us as we think about the future of Black America?
Right. So in America, in Black America specifically, and I've observed it myself personally, there can be barriers to progress, right? Even if you are qualified, you have the correct skills, and you bring the right skill set to the table, one may not always have the chance to participate, right, in the system that's currently in place. However, there are places around the world, East Africa, for example, the rest of the continent, where they're actually looking for people like us, people with a certain knowledge base, to bring that to their experience. They're open to absorb, inject that technology, inject the knowledge into how they operate. If looking at several examples or several conversations that I've had, meeting other delegates there at the summit, I realized that there were some really simple, there were challenges. There are certainly, quite a few challenges on the continent. However, I noticed that just from my observation that some really simple, what we consider simple solutions, could be quickly implemented to have a great impact. So the problem here is that the perception and the perception in the US, even among Black America, is that, okay, one has to be scared of Africa. It's a scary place, scary things happen. But
actually, I was asking you another question because the fact is, Kenya was ahead of us in mobile payment. So
of course,
what could we learn? As I'm saying, what we have to look at what it is that we are going to be doing to not be further behind. Is there something happening on the continent, like with the mobile money using blockchain that we might borrow in the African American communities in Chicago, in the South, that we could use to create an alternative economy or an alternative insurance system? Is there something that's already happening that we could use?
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And even for, my case, there's a lot for me to learn in Africa, what's really happening there on the ground. If you go back to the mobile money in Kenya, I believe M-Pesa, it was actually the local conditions that actually brought about this innovation, right? This innovation would not happen in the West. So, there's some unique conditions in Africa that will drive some of this innovation. And I think that's an important key point, that not everything will be transferable, say, from Africa to the African American community and vice versa, but we could both learn from each other. Going back to M-Pesa, it was a result of the lack of landlines, right? There was no telephone lines going to individual residents or businesses, right? So of course, one had to rely on their mobile phone for, making calls, whatever. And then, the second part of that is the banking system. There were, quite a few unbanked, quite a lot unbanked. And the banking system really didn't cater to the common man, so to speak, common people. So as a result, there was a need, and as a result, this mobile money or money that could be transacted over a phone, right? Using text messages, it was actually a perfect solution for that region. However, something like that in the U.S., there are already institutions in place that I would suspect would resist some of these developments in America, right?
So the credit card system wouldn't want that. The debit card system wouldn't want it. The loan charge wouldn't want that. The people wouldn't want that. So let's take a scenario of the people, mobile money, cryptocurrency, and healthcare. Let's say, for example, National Medical Association were to create a self-insurance scheme where a couple of doctors say, hey, we're going to become an HMO, online telemedicine, right? Could blockchain support a system in which is a cryptocurrency model, right? That's on the chain. The people who are in the insurance scheme, the doctors who are in the insurance scheme, the people who are in the insurance scheme, and the insurance company become like one mega system of, say, 2 million people. Now we have 2 million people, some of whom are doctors and some of whom are patients, 100,000 of whom are doctors. The other 1.9 million are patients that are not currently insured or underinsured, that now have a system in which they can become insured, pay some small amount in cryptocurrency that's called an insurance, whatever, coin, right? Intracoin, right? And then intracoin becomes a currency that can be traded for people who could go in and out of the system based on where they are, at the time. Because as you know, the economy about work is also changing. The future of work will be different. People will not have jobs that give them health insurance, so you have to create your own health insurance. When I talk about made up scenarios like that, which I just did on the spur of the moment, is that something that sounds totally crazy, or does it sound
it's not
borderline of what could happen?
It's not only on the borderline of what could happen. I mean, you basically described a new business idea, a startup that could be had from this, right? So
my startup. Are you gonna be in my startup? Are you gonna be in my startup? I have to find some doctors. I'm ready. I want to have a tech startup. I have a tech startup.
So this is a perfect example of what blockchain, of what an enterprise or private blockchain can do. So again, it's a consortia. You have a group of, whether it's a group of doctors, a group of healthcare practitioners or clinics, and then you have a group of patients who agree to operate together in a certain framework, in a certain environment, and then blockchain would provide that framework. In addition, blockchain technology has this thing called smart contracts, and smart contracts could essentially manage how what gets done, when it gets done, and who does it, and cost structure. So that could all be I shouldn't say automated, but baked into the system, where the technology can provide blockchain can provide the platform to enable what you've just described. So yes, and of course, I'm sure regulators would be interested in seeing what's happening in this consortia, and they could be part of this consortia. So there's a regulatory body could then be part of the blockchain to have visibility in the operations to ensure that, for one, patients are properly cared for and they're not taken advantage of.
Got you.
So that's one example.
Got you.
Right?
Got you.
So there has to be some controls.
Checks and balances.
Right, exactly. Whether it's self-regulation or some external regulatory body. But again, going back to your point, this is a perfect example for an implementation of blockchain technology.
So when you think, we're kind of coming to an end, when you think about the future and the way the technology is emerging with 5G and other Gs that are coming along, what keeps you up at night? I mean, things that, people that work at your level who invent things, what keeps you up at night?
So I wouldn't say it really keeps me up at night, but I think about it a lot. So the technology is great. However, one has to be careful, right? So if you're on a playing field where you don't understand the rules, you will be taken advantage of. So, we have to educate ourselves as a community to understand, not having a deep understanding, PhD level, or anything like that of the technology, but to just get an understanding of, what are the implications of this technology, and how it may affect you. So have an understanding beyond, okay, I could use social media, I could post things. There's more beyond that, because it's your data. You're not even benefiting from it, but these large corporations are actually making trillions of dollars from your interaction on their platform. Think about that. Like, why aren't you benefiting from it? And if you extrapolate that out 10, 15 years, what will that look like in the future? If someone else owns your data and they're monetizing your data, you have no control over it, then you will be data poor. They'll be data rich. And it's I guess a new form of controls, right? Where those who have those who have the data are in control, those who don't, or don't have control.
Data colonialism.
That might be one way to put it.
Data colony. So when you think about our ability to actually do what you just said, for enrolling blockchain 101 and data analytics 101, are you optimistic, pessimistic, or neutralistic that enough decision makers and influencers, especially in the policy making and politics, see the need to kind of sign themselves up?
I'm cautiously optimistic. It all boils down to policies, right, on the macro level. But on the micro level, it's up to each individual to educate themselves, right, to get that awareness. And it's not all bad here in terms of the technology, whether it's AI, blockchain, quantum, or whatever, right? There's lots of information out there, free information, freely available. If you think about it, at no other point in history has there been this much information freely available to each and every individual, once you have internet connection, of course. There's so much information out there, whether it's on not to plug a specific company, on YouTube. It's freely available. you could learn, at different levels of, whether it's AI, whether it's blockchain, there are like 101 or, point one level courses that are available, or just to get a feel of what this thing is. You may not understand it the first time around, but over time okay, I get it now. I had to start somewhere myself, and today, I talk to executives in different parts of the world about this technology. And back in 2016, I knew nothing about this thing called blockchain. I was surprised that it even existed, and I didn't know about it. Right? It's like, what is this thing? How come I never heard about it? So I basically, dug into this technology and ensured that I fully understood it, because I realized the implication here. If you look at the internet back in you've heard this maybe many times about the internet back in the 80s. Look at where it is today. We're actually watching high definition videos. We're banking. We're booking or travel. There are no more. What do you call these? You used to call somebody on the phone for them to arrange your travel arrangement. Now you could do that from your mobile phone. You could deposit a check from your mobile phone. Think about that.
I'm thinking about it because I'm wondering how you jump from not knowing anything about blockchain to have 5 patents pending in 3 years. So Claire, you did a lot. You did a lot of self-study. So which means that if you can so quickly ramp up and be educated, you'll be able to tell me this headline story, which is my last question, what it is that in 2030 you're now embarked on this outreach to Africa. You are based in Austin, where is the hot city for tech startups and people doing stuff, and Quatro, or I don't know how you pronounce it. Quatro is the name of your company. It is a startup itself. I want you to tell me where Quatro is, where a headline about how it has changed something in 2030 in the African diaspora community. I'm going to broaden it now to the African diaspora world, since that you're already with your toes in Africa, at least more than your toes. Your feet are now in Africa as well.
Right. More than my toes. So yes, so that's it's a difficult thing to predict the future. But what I'm doing today,
not predict.
I know.
No, wait. For futurists, we don't predict the future. What we do is we lay out aspirational scenarios, and then we simply create the roadmap to get to this aspiration. There you go. So now, lay out your aspirational headline.
So I see myself, the role that I play in Quatro. So when I launched my company, I decided that I decided to work in emerging countries, in emerging industrialized countries. For example, Southeast Asia and Africa, of course, because they're looking for technology to be able to become first world like everyone else, right? That's the aspiration there. And my role is I see myself as in Quatro as a medium for enabling, educating, governments, countries, ministries, and those in power, those who will basically the ones who are laying the path for the future, so that they have an awareness of technology, the implications of technology, how that should be mixed with policies in order to create a better future for their people, for their country, for society as a whole, and the world.
So my headline for you, since you didn't give me one, I'm going to make it one. So in 2030, in terms of health goal, Rwanda will announce that Rwanda has successfully installed over 250 maternal health centers around the country, which are fed with telehealth data and support and medicine and care. Therefore, they have reduced the maternal deaths from its high in 2010 to less than 10% of what that was. And this was working closely with Quatro, their preferred advisor, preferred and trusted advisor. There you have it.
Thank you very much. So, I think you're probably more than a futurist because, in the coming months, you may actually hear something along those lines. So we'll see.
That would be good. So thank you so much. Really, it's a lot to cover. Blockchain and those technologies are not easy. But so thank you for this insightful conversation on how data and AI and blockchain might impact the future history of Black America. Howard Anglin.
Thank you very much. And I look forward to speaking with you again.
So folks, that's it. We have come to another end of a story or of this conversation, this exploration on Future Sense Now, where we explore salient idea for sustainable futures. Remember that the future is embedded in the landscape of today. So go out and seize the future that we co-create. And until next time, I say to you, safe journeys, my friends.
Thank you for listening to Future Sense Now with Dr. Claire Nelson. Future Sense Now is produced by the Futures Forum in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Remember, our futures are embedded in the landscape of our present stories. Seize the day, share this story, and share the future.